Let me introduce Ryan Jacobson. He's for those of y'all who don't know him, is our Director of Missions here at Allen Heights Methodist. And he has a message for you. And I don't know if it's good or bad. I'll tell you when it's over. Take it away, Ryan. Thanks, man.
Rolling communal midrash is a way that some of us have taught here in the church in many, many different settings. Some of you might have sat through it in New Heights. We did it about 3 or 4 times this summer. We've done it in the confirmation class last year. We did it in youth a few weeks ago. And what it means is this. We all read this document together. We take turns. I'm going to have you guys read it out loud. You'll read a couple of paragraphs if you volunteer, and then you offer your thoughts on what you just read. After the person that read offers their thoughts, we open it up for the larger group to discuss as a whole. We've got a lot of people in here, so I do ask that we keep your sharing kind of brief. Don't go longer than 2 minutes, and be nice to each other. The different words here, we call it rolling communal midrash. Rolling because it goes the directions that you guys want it to go. We do have a guiding document to guide the discussion, but if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, things like that, we take this conversation where you guys want to take this conversation. Communal means we do this together. We do this as a community. We learn as a community. We talk as a community, and we study the text as a community. Midrash is a Hebrew word that means out of interpretation. And what this is for us, it says that your interpretations are valuable and they're valid. So everybody in this room has some kind of thoughts about the Bible. Some of them good, some of them bad, but they're all valid. So if you guys have an idea about the Bible and you want to bring that up and you want to talk about that, you can do that because this is communal and it's your interpretation, and your interpretation is important. Does this make sense? Yes? All right. Well, then we will begin. I will ask for volunteers to read beginning. Like I said, read a few paragraphs, and then we will talk about the little bit that we've read. At the end, there are some questions so you can talk in your small groups. Do I have a volunteer to read first? Please.
The Gospel and How We Change. The Bible is quite a big library of books. We have 7 weeks to talk about what we find in the Bible. There are many different paths we can take. We can chase the themes of covenant or freedom, kingdom of heaven, or even clothing. Seriously, one day, find all the mentions of clothing you can in the Bible. You'll find some really fascinating stuff. How far do you go, Barry?
Just a few paragraphs.
All of these themes are good and will lead us into great conversations about the Bible. We're going to chase another one down through. One of the best things that we find in the Bible is that things change, people change, tribes change, countries change, the world changes. The first thing to remember when we're talking about the Bible is that it's a collection of words that were written by real people in real time, in real places, spanning over 1,000 years. There are stories written about different cultures and different languages, about different events, and written in different genres. Naturally, with a collection of writings like these, things are going to change.
That's good. Do you have anything you want to say about that?
No.
Makes sense? Yeah. Yeah. So the Bible was written probably over a span of about 1,200 years. Think about somebody writing something down in the year 800, which is about 1,200 years ago, and then us just finishing the book today. That's quite a long time, and it's important to keep that kind of thing in mind when we're talking about the Bible and when different parts of the Bible were written and what they were about. Whoever reads next is going to have an interesting word. The word is pronounced quadratos. Everybody say it with me, quadratos. So when you come across that word, that's how you say it. Who would like to read next? Please.
There's an ancient understanding. Did we start there?
Yes, please.
Meaning 4 paths. As we talk about the Bible over the next several weeks, we're going to look at it through the lens of quadratics, just as the early Christians did. They set up their regular reading cycle of the Gospels in a way that we might say seems out of order. Matthew, Mark, John, then Luke. The reason for this is that they noticed each of the Gospels addressed suggest a certain path of the quadratus. I guess we should talk about what each of these paths are. Each path focuses on a simple question. As we face the events and problems and joys of our lives, we might see that each of these questions is one that even we have to answer at various points. Here they are. 1. How do we face change? 2. How do we move through suffering? 3. How do we receive joy? And 4. How do we mature in service?
Anything to add? Anything to add from anybody? Any thoughts, questions? I'm really good at sitting in awkward silence. I'll just say that once. So, which part? Kind of the one that talks about the quadratos? Sorry? Summarize it. So, does everybody know what the lectionary is? Lectionary? A lectionary is a reading cycle. It's just how we read the scriptures. It goes through 3 different years, and it's what order we read the scriptures in. The early Christians took the Gospels and they read them in a certain order. They read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, then John, then Luke. Our Bible often puts it Luke and then John, or our Bible does put it Luke, John. But these people, the early Christians, set up this reading, this way of reading, because they realized that these different Gospels answered these different questions. The 4 questions that she just read. And they realized that these kind of questions are questions that we have to answer every day in our own lives. Sometimes we have to change. Sometimes things happen that make us suffer or give us pain. Sometimes it's just the best day of our lives. And sometimes we have to figure out how to carry that message forward and how to help people. So the quadratos is just a fancy way of saying these 4 simple paths that we have to walk down as individuals, and they realized that the scriptures talked about these questions. And so they read them in a certain order so that they could talk about these questions in those books. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Does that mean like number 1 is change is going to be Matthew, suffering is Mark?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's what we'll get into next.
Why they have to put number 4 is 4? Couldn't they have switched the questions so that they could go Israel to the way the Bible's written?
They could have switched the questions, but they noticed that it's a pretty steady process, pretty steady way that we go through these questions.
Okay, so maybe it like follows the way your brain.
It follows the way that we grow.
Okay.
So we see change coming, and then change actually happens, and sometimes that's not fun. Once we're through that change, we might find some joy in that. We have a new epiphany, we have new knowledge, we have something to celebrate. But once we have something to celebrate, we often get stuck there, so we need to actually carry that forward, which is that last question. And then they notice it just keeps starting over, and we go through it over and over and over. Lectionary just means reading cycle. It's the way that we read the scriptures. We still use it here in the Methodist Church. Anybody want to read next? All right.
Mountain to talk about his first path. If you're trying to think of something that lasts a really long time, it would be hard to beat a mountain. Mountains represent steadiness and permanence. On the Sermon on the Mount is perhaps the most well-known of Jesus' longer speeches in the gospel. This sermon took place on the mountain, but asked for the people that were listening to change the way they looked at each other, change the way they looked at their enemies, change the way they looked at the world around them, and change the way they looked at God. To sit back and look at the mountain is amazing. We see stability and beauty and steadiness, but sometimes the mountain must be climbed. Sometimes the place on the other side of the mountain is where we need to be. The Gospel of Matthew ends on a mountain as well. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had just told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him. Some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am always with you to the very end of the age." Matthew 28:16 through 20. Jesus knows that the time ahead of the disciples will be quite the challenge. He takes them once more to the top of the mountain. He gives them an idea what their future looks like and of what they must do and how they will change the world. And he tells them that through all he will be with them.
Anything to add?
Just that he's always with us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? All right. Who'd like to read next? How about a student this time? I see some fingers over here.
To do, but certainly going through it can be even harder. Change is something easy and beautiful and good, but it's also sometimes scary and difficult. Think about moving to a new school, or sometimes parents get divorced, or sometimes someone that has always been in your life passes away. These times are not fun and they're not easy, but they're something we all go through at some point. The Gospel of Mark has some of its darkest descriptions of painful and terrifying times. Sometimes the metaphor is a stormy sea. That day when everything came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There are also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Mark 4. Okay. In another story, the disciples are out in a boat during another storm, and Jesus walks out to them on the water. They see him out there and become terrified because they think he's a ghost. To the ancient Jewish people, large bodies of water were known as the abyss. Say it real scary. The abyss. They thought they might be the gateway to hell. They were terrified of water. To be in the water during a storm just made it all the worse. But what we see in these stories is that the disciples didn't suffer through these scary events by themselves. Jesus went through the sea with them, comfortable enough to sleep through it. When we go through painful times, and we will, we remember the Gospel of Mark, and we remember that God is with us in these times.
Good. Anything to add?
No.
We did see a common theme there that when we face change and when we're going through it, when it is painful, both of these instances tell us that God is still with us, that Jesus is there, that there's something going through that with us. Just, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. As you mentioned earlier, that he's with us. Yeah, just as Bob said. Does anybody else have anything to add? Can anybody think of painful times, and you don't have to say them out loud. I'm not asking you to do that. But just for yourself, think of painful times when you might have realized that God was with you in it. Who'd like to read next? Yeah. Yes, please. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Scott. That is a very good point. I love what he said. We do it together. He said, I don't know if we do it right, and sometimes doing it right or wrong doesn't matter, but that we do it together is really good. Thank you, Scott. Who would like to read about John? How about one of the boys? I see these 3 tables full of boys. One of you guys do it. I'm going to say this first table right here with these guys that are trying not to see me. One of you 4.
And we've actually gone through the hard work to actually change it. To find what makes it all the worthwhile. The Gospel of John is so vastly different from the other 3 Gospels that it makes you wonder where it even came from. John wrote his Gospel as an old man. He had been through all of his life, had met and grown to love Jesus personally. But then he watched him die. He planted churches throughout parts of the Roman Empire. But he also saw the Roman armies destroy those churches and murder his friends. He had been through a lot. But his gospel is one of joy and inspiration and encouragement. He uses a metaphor of a garden to talk about his joy. He opens his gospel with these lines. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Do these words remind you of anything? Yes. The creation poem of Genesis. This is where God says that all he has made, the plants and animals and soil and sea and planets and stars and seasons and suns and moon and light and us, is good. God says it is all very good. The Gospel of John is about realizing that all can be well again after pain and after work and after change. The change is even part of the goodness of creation that moves it all forward.
Thank you. Anything to add?
Does anybody know what that word epiphany is? We celebrate it every year after Advent. Epiphany means a time with God. Sometimes we come to a point in our lives where we realize God is really with us. It's called an epiphany.
So after we go through some of this change, after we go through some of this suffering, we realize that God was there with us the entire time and that life can be good. That life is something to celebrate, and we often come to a place of celebration. Anybody else want to add anything? All right, who wants to read about Luke? Go ahead.
Something to celebrate after moving through a trial. Think about final exams. When you're done, it's time to play. However, there's always a time to move forward. The Gospel of Luke talks a lot of Jesus being on the road. He's always on the move and going places. He's on the top road to Jerusalem, and the road to Tyre, and the road to Emmaus. When we realize what the gospel of Luke is that our times of joy are not for us alone. When we get on the road with them and move through the rest of our lives and share them with others that travel with us. Right?
Yeah, somebody else can take the second half of Luke. Who else would you like to read? All right.
As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Why not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them, assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and he has appeared to Simon." In the story of the road to Emmaus, Jesus shares a new joy with his friends. They in turn travel the road back to Jerusalem to share it with even more people, as it should be with us. Luke teaches us to reach out with our joy to others around us, to share in what we have and what we can do with those that need those things.
Anything to add?
Not particularly.
If I had been in lunch last week, I perhaps would have put the language of radical love here in this last section. When you guys learn about radical love and when you practice radical love, this is
Part of the path that you're on. We've gone through everything, and now we're helping everybody else out. We're gathering food for the poor. We're trying to get money for the poor. We're going and building churches and building playgrounds in Costa Rica and things like that. This is the part of the path, the four paths, that is the radical love. Does anybody else want to add anything? All right, who'd like to finish us off then? This is the last section. Go ahead. That's fine.
anybody.
I'll read. And then we start over. Using the seasons of the year described as process of change is helpful. The changing world of autumn is the first path of Matthew. The stark death of winter is the second path of Mark. The rebirth of everything in spring is the third path of John. And the warm radiance of summer is the fourth path of Luke. Of course, what comes after summer is yet another autumn and another winter and another spring and another summer, and it just keeps going. These four paths of transformation never really end. Not for us or the people around us, or the people in the Bible, or even for all of creation. God made the seasons of change and death and rebirth and radiance. I think he did so to remind us that nothing really stays the same for us either. We move forward through life and we keep growing up. Even our moms and dads and teachers and pastors are still growing up. Today we've learned a little about how each of the Gospels addresses one of these questions. As you go through the next few weeks, the lessons have been written in such a way that you see that the story of the Bible tells the story of moving along these four paths over and over again. Keep this path in mind as you learn the stories of the Bible and how the story of God unfolds.
Anything to add?
For anybody else? So in places other than San Antonio, they do have 4 seasons. And you will notice this a lot more. You see the trees lose all their leaves and snow comes. You don't see animals anymore in winter. And then the spring comes and you begin to see new birth. You begin to see little creatures and you see little plants and things growing up. And then you see summer, where everything matures, where everything is radiant, where times are fun and easy, sometimes relaxing and sometimes kind of a blitz. And then you go into the autumn again where things start to change. So they saw, the early Christians, when they were reading through these Gospels, they saw the similarity between the seasons of the year, the questions that these Gospels ask, and then the same questions that they ask in their lives. They began to realize also that the rest of the Bible asks these questions over and over and over and over again. So for the next 6 weeks after today, you will go through different parts of the Bible, starting from Genesis and moving all the way through the epistles and Revelation, and you'll see how these paths unfold in the Scripture. Anything else to add from anybody? Absolutely.
Know that there is change. There is going to be happiness. There is, and then the rebirth.
Absolutely.
So if you're stuck in sadness or whatever one mentioned, there's hope.
Thank you. Anybody else?
All right then. On the next page, you have some more questions to talk about amongst yourselves in your small groups. There are about 6 of those questions, and you guys have the rest of the time to do those.